Old man stood on highway with sign, veteran needs help. What truckers did next shocked the governor. The cardboard sign was barely legible in the morning rain, the marker ink running down the soggy surface like tears, but the words were still clear enough to read from 100 yards away. Veteran needs help, lost everything, God bless. The old man holding it stood on the shoulder of Interstate 40 just outside Little Rock, Arkansas, at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November, his body swaying slightly in the wind from passing trucks, his clothes soaked through, his face weathered and hollow with the kind of exhaustion that comes not from lack of sleep but from lack of hope, from fighting too long against odds too steep, from reaching the point where standing on a highway with a sign seems like the only option left when all other options have been exhausted. His name was Colonel William Bill Hastings, United States Army, retired, age 72, and 3 months ago he'd had a home and savings and dignity. And now he had a cardboard sign and the desperate prayer that someone, anyone, would see him and care enough to help. The first trucker to see him was Danny Nighthawk Rodriguez, hauling a load of electronics from Memphis to Oklahoma City, and when his headlights caught that sign, when he read those words, veteran needs help, something inside him broke and reformed in the same instant, because Danny's father had been a Vietnam vet who'd struggled with PTSD and homelessness, who died on the streets of Houston before Danny could find him and bring him home, and the sight of this old man in the rain, holding that sign, was like seeing his father's ghost, like being given a second chance to do what he'd failed to do before, to help when help was needed, to be the answer to someone's prayer instead of the person who drove past pretending not to see. Danny pulled his Kenworth onto the shoulder 200 yards past the old man, hit his hazard lights, and grabbed his CB radio with hands that were shaking with emotion and determination, and the absolute certainty that he was about to do something that mattered, something that would ripple outward in ways he couldn't predict but knew in his bones would be important, would be right, would be the kind of action that defines who you are when no one's watching, when there's no reward except the knowledge that you saw someone suffering and decided that their suffering was your problem, their need was your responsibility, their humanity was your concern. Breaker, breaker, this is Nighthawk on a Minus 40 eastbound at mile marker 157, and I need every driver within range to listen up because I just passed a veteran standing in the rain with a sign asking for help, and I'm not driving past this. I'm not pretending I didn't see it. I'm not letting this man stand out here alone while we all roll by in our warm cabs thinking someone else will stop, someone else will help, someone else will care. I'm stopping, and I'm asking anyone who hears this to stop with me, because whatever this man needs, whatever brought him to this highway, whatever circumstances put him here in the rain holding that sign, he deserves better than to be invisible, deserves better than to be ignored, deserves better than what this country has apparently given him after he gave this country his service. The response was immediate and overwhelming, voices crackling over the CB radio with the kind of urgency that comes from recognizing a moral imperative, from understanding that some moments demand action, and this was one of them, from knowing that the measure of a community isn't how it treats its successful members, but how it treats its most vulnerable, its most desperate, its most in need of help. Nighthawk, this is Iron Horse. I'm 10 miles back. I see your location. I'm pulling over. This is Mama Bear. I'm 5 miles ahead, turning around now. Diesel Duke here. I'm at the truck stop at exit 153. Got 4 rigs with me. We're rolling to your position. This is Wildflower. I'm 20 miles out westbound. Be there in 15 minutes. What does he need? Within 20 minutes, Interstate 40 eastbound had become something that looked like a truck rally or a protest or a miracle, depending on your perspective, because 17 18-wheelers had pulled onto the shoulder in a line that stretched for half a mile, their hazard lights flashing in synchronized rhythm, their drivers emerging from their cabs with rain gear and thermoses, and the kind of determined compassion that comes from people who understand hardship, who have known struggle, who remember what it's like to be one paycheck from disaster, one crisis from catastrophe, One bad break from standing on a highway with a sign asking strangers for help. Danny reached Colonel Hastings first, approaching slowly with his hands visible and his voice gentle, because he understood that desperation makes people wary, that pride makes accepting help difficult, that a man who'd been a colonel doesn't easily become a man holding a sign on a highway, and the transition between those two states involves trauma and loss, and the kind of soul-crushing defeat that leaves scars invisible to everyone, except those who have carried similar wounds. "Sir, my name is Danny Rodriguez. I'm a trucker and I saw your sign and I'm here to help. Can you tell me what you need? Can you tell me what happened?" Bill Hastings looked at Danny with eyes that had seen combat in 3 different wars, that had commanded men in life-and-death situations, that had made decisions affecting thousands of lives, and those eyes were now filled with tears that mixed with the rain on his face, tears of relief and shame and gratitude and exhaustion, because he'd been standing on this highway for 4 hours and hundreds of vehicles had passed and no one had stopped until now. Until this trucker with kind eyes and a gentle voice had pulled over and walked back through the rain to ask what he needed, to offer help, to see him as a human being instead of just another homeless person to ignore. "I'm Colonel William Hastings, U.S. Army retired. I served 32 years, 3 combat tour, commanded a battalion in Iraq. 3 months ago my wife died of cancer. The medical bills bankrupted us, took everything, the house, the savings, everything. I've been living in my car, but it broke down 2 days ago and I couldn't afford to fix it. I've been trying to get to my daughter's house in Oklahoma, but I don't have money for a bus ticket, don't have money for food, don't have anything except this sign and the hope that someone would stop, that someone would help, that I wouldn't die out here on this highway like some forgotten piece of trash that nobody cares about." His voice broke on the last words, decades of military bearing and stoic strength crumbling under the weight of circumstances too heavy to carry alone, and Danny put his arm around the old man's shoulders and held him while he cried, while 17 other truckers gathered around, forming a circle of protection and solidarity and shared humanity. Because this could be any of them. This could be their fathers or grandfathers. This could be their own future if luck turned bad and circumstances aligned wrong, and the safety nets that were supposed to catch people failed the way they'd apparently failed Colonel William Hastings. Sarah Mama Bear Chen, who turned her rig around and driven against traffic, on the shoulder to reach them, pulled out her phone and started making calls, because she'd been a social worker before becoming a trucker, and she knew the systems and resources available to veterans, knew how to navigate the bureaucracy that was supposed to help people like Bill, but often failed them through incompetence or underfunding or simple indifference. Marcus Ironhorse Sullivan, himself a Marine veteran, stood at attention and saluted Colonel Hastings with the kind of respect that transcends circumstances, that recognizes service regardless of current situation. That says your rank and your sacrifice and your dignity remain intact even when everything else has been stripped away. Tommy Wrench Martinez, a mechanic who'd left the road to open his own shop but still monitored the CB channels, heard the call and immediately closed his garage and drove to the location with his tow truck, because if the colonel's car had broken down then fixing, it was something concrete he could do, something tangible that would help, something that would turn this moment from charity into restoration, from handout into hand up, from pity into respect. Other truckers were pulling out their wallets, collecting cash, counting bills, creating a fund that grew from hundreds to thousands in minutes, because everyone wanted to contribute, everyone wanted to be part of the solution. Everyone wanted to prove that the system might have failed this veteran, but his fellow citizens wouldn't. His community wouldn't. The brotherhood of the road wouldn't. And here's where I need you to understand something profound about what happened next, because this wasn't just about helping one man. This was about exposing a systemic failure, about highlighting how veterans who serve their country with honor and distinction can still end up on highways holding signs, about forcing a reckoning with the gap between the rhetoric of supporting our troops and the reality of how we treat veterans when they need help. Hit that subscribe button right now because you're about to witness something that went from a roadside rescue to a statewide movement that caught the attention of the governor and changed policy, and proved that sometimes the most powerful political action comes not from politicians, but from ordinary people who refuse to accept that this is how we treat our heroes. One of the truckers, a woman named Jennifer Phoenix Walsh, who'd been a military journalist before her discharge, started live streaming the scene on social media, explaining what was happening, introducing Colonel Hastings, telling his story with the kind of compelling narrative that made viewers understand this wasn't just about one veteran, but about thousands who fall through the cracks, who serve their country and then get abandoned by the systems that were supposed to protect them, who end up homeless and desperate and invisible despite their sacrifice and service. The stream went viral within an hour, shared by veteran organizations and trucking communities and regular people who were outraged that a decorated colonel was standing on a highway in the rain, asking for help. By 9 a.m., the story had been picked up by local news stations who sent crews to the scene, and the image of 17 trucks parked on the shoulder surrounding a veteran in need became the lead story on every channel, became a symbol of both systemic failure and community response, became a rallying cry for people demanding better treatment for veterans. By 10 a.m., the governor's office was being flooded with calls and emails and social media messages demanding action, demanding explanation, demanding to know how a 32-year veteran with 3 combat tours could end up homeless and desperate, demanding accountability for the systems that had failed him. Colonel Hastings was taken to a nearby hotel by Sarah, given a room and hot food and dry clothes, while Tommy went to retrieve and repair his broken-down car, a 2004 Honda Accord with 240,000 miles and a blown-head gasket that would cost $1,200 to fix, money that the truckers had already collected along with another $8,000 for immediate needs, for food and gas, and whatever else the colonel needed to get to his daughter's house and start rebuilding his life. But the truckers weren't satisfied with just helping one man, weren't content with a feel-good story that would be forgotten by next week, because they understood that Colonel Hastings represented a larger problem, a systemic failure that required systemic solutions, and they were determined to use this moment to force change. Marcus Ironhorse Sullivan, who'd become the de facto spokesman for the group, gave an interview to the news cameras that was raw and passionate and impossible to ignore. "We've got a decorated colonel, a man who commanded troops in combat, a man who gave 32 years of his life to this country, standing on a highway in the rain with a cardboard sign because the systems that were supposed to take care of him failed. His wife died of cancer and the medical bills bankrupted them, which means our healthcare system failed. He couldn't access veteran benefits quickly enough to prevent homelessness, which means our VA system failed. He stood on this highway for 4 hours and hundreds of people drove past without stopping, which means we as a society have failed to maintain the basic human decency of helping people in need. This is unacceptable. This is shameful. And this needs to change, not just for Colonel Hastings, but for every veteran who's struggling, who's homeless, who's standing somewhere right now with a sign asking for help that shouldn't be necessary." The interview went viral, was shared millions of times, was picked up by national news networks, and suddenly Colonel William Hastings wasn't just a local story. He was a national symbol of veteran neglect, a face and a name attached to statistics that had been easy to ignore when they were just numbers, but became impossible to ignore when they were a 72-year-old man standing in the rain. Veteran organizations across the country started using his story to advocate for policy changes, for increased funding, for streamlined benefit processes, for the kind of systemic reforms that had been needed for decades but had never gotten political traction because the problem had been abstract, had been easy to overlook, had been someone else's responsibility. By noon, The governor of Arkansas, Michelle Bradford, had personally called Colonel Hastings to apologize for the failures that had led to his situation and to promise immediate action. She announced an emergency review of veteran services in Arkansas, the creation of a rapid response team to help veterans facing housing crises, and the allocation of $50 million in state funds to expand veteran support programs. She also announced that she was creating a task force to investigate why Colonel Hastings's benefits had been delayed, why the safety nets had failed, why a decorated veteran had fallen through the cracks, and what systemic changes were needed to ensure it never happened again. But the governor's response, while welcome, wasn't enough for the truckers who'd stopped that morning, who'd seen firsthand the desperation in Colonel Hastings's eyes, who understood that press releases and promises weren't the same as action, weren't the same as results, weren't the same as ensuring that no veteran would ever have to stand on a highway with a sign again. They organized a convoy to the state capitol, 17 trucks rolling through Little Rock with Colonel Hastings riding in the lead vehicle, their air horns blaring as they parked in front of the Capitol building, and demanded a meeting with the governor, demanded accountability, demanded that the promises made in response to media attention would be kept when the cameras turned off and the public moved. On to the next story. The meeting happened that afternoon, the governor sitting down with Colonel Hastings and the truckers in a conference room that was supposed to hold 15 people, but somehow accommodated 30, because no one was willing to be excluded from this moment, from this reckoning, from this opportunity to speak truth to power, and demand that the rhetoric of supporting veterans be matched by the reality of actually supporting them. Colonel Hastings spoke first, his voice steady now, his military bearing restored by rest and food and the knowledge that he wasn't alone, that he had allies, that his story had been heard and had mattered. Governor Bradford, I appreciate your response and your promises, but I need you to understand that I'm not unique. There are thousands of veterans in Arkansas alone who are struggling, who are one crisis away from homelessness, who are navigating systems that are designed to be complicated and slow and discouraging. The VA benefits that I was entitled to took 6 months to process, and in that 6 months I lost everything. My wife's cancer treatment bankrupted us because the VA wouldn't cover certain procedures, wouldn't approve certain medications, wouldn't move fast enough to prevent financial catastrophe. I stood on that highway this morning not because I wanted to, not because I'm lazy or irresponsible, but because every system that was supposed to help me failed, and I had nowhere else to turn. His words hung in the air like an indictment, and Governor Bradford, to her credit, didn't make excuses, didn't deflect blame, didn't hide behind bureaucratic language. Colonel Hastings, you're right. The system failed you, and that failure is unacceptable. I'm committed today, in front of these witnesses and these cameras, to specific, measurable changes. First, we're creating an emergency fund that veterans can access within 48 hours when facing housing or medical crises. Second, we're hiring 50 additional caseworkers specifically to help veterans navigate VA benefits and state services. Third, we're establishing a hotline that veterans can call 24/7 to get immediate help, not referrals or appointments, but actual immediate assistance. Fourth, we're partnering with veteran organizations and community groups, including the trucking community that responded so powerfully today, to create a network of support that doesn't rely solely on government systems that have proven inadequate. She turned to the truckers, her expression a mixture of gratitude and respect. What you did today, stopping for a stranger, mobilizing your community, refusing to accept that this was someone else's problem, that's what citizenship looks like. That's what community looks like. That's what America is supposed to look like. You've shamed us, frankly, shamed the government systems that should have prevented Colonel Hastings from ever needing to stand on that highway. And you've shown us what's possible when people decide that indifference isn't acceptable, that neglect isn't tolerable, that we have a responsibility to each other that transcends politics and bureaucracy and convenience. The truckers left. That meeting with commitments in writing, with timelines and accountability measures, with the governor's personal phone number and the promise that if the systems failed again, if another veteran ended up on a highway with a sign, they could call her directly and she would respond personally. But they also left with the understanding that government promises, however sincere, required constant pressure to maintain, required vigilance to ensure implementation, required community involvement to hold officials accountable when the media attention faded and the public moved on to other concerns. So they created something that hadn't existed before: the Highway Angels, a network of truckers specifically dedicated to helping veterans in crisis, operating through CB radio and social media, and the informal communication channels that connected drivers across the country. They established protocols for responding to veterans in need, created a fund to provide emergency assistance, partnered with veteran organizations to ensure that help was comprehensive and not just temporary, and committed to being the safety net that government systems had failed to provide. Within 6 months, the Highway Angels had helped 147 veterans across 12 states, providing everything from emergency housing to job placement to medical assistance to simple human connection, and the knowledge that someone cared, someone was watching, someone would respond when help was needed. Colonel William Hastings never stood on another highway with a sign. The Truckers Fund gave him enough money to reach his daughter's house in Oklahoma, to get his car repaired, to have a cushion while his VA benefits were expedited and his situation stabilized. His daughter, who'd been searching for him for weeks after losing contact, welcomed him into her home with tears and gratitude and the fierce determination to never let him fall through the cracks again. He eventually got his own apartment, started receiving his full military pension and VA benefits, began volunteering with veteran organizations to help others navigate the systems that had failed him, turning his worst moment into a mission to prevent others from experiencing similar desperation. But more importantly, his story became a catalyst for change that extended far beyond Arkansas. Other states adopted similar rapid response programs for veterans in crisis. The VA implemented reforms to speed up benefit processing and reduce bureaucratic barriers. Congress passed legislation increasing funding for veteran homelessness prevention programs. And the image of those 17 trucks parked on the shoulder of a Minus 40, surrounding a veteran in need, became an iconic symbol of community response, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, of the gap between how we say we value veterans and how we actually treat them, and the moral obligation to close that gap through action rather than just rhetoric. Danny Nighthawk Rodriguez, the trucker who'd made that first CB call, who'd been the first to stop, who'd started the chain of events that led to all of this, continued driving his routes but carried with him the knowledge that one decision, one moment of choosing to stop instead of driving past, had changed a life and sparked a movement and proven that individual actions matter, that seeing someone in need and deciding it's your problem to solve can ripple outward in ways you never imagined, can create change that extends far beyond the immediate moment, can be the difference between despair and hope, between invisibility and recognition, between a system that fails and a community that catches those who fall. He kept a photo on his dashboard, a picture taken that morning on Minus 40, showing Colonel Hastings surrounded by truckers, the rain still falling but the old man's face transformed from desperation to hope, from isolation to connection, from invisible to seen. Danny looked at that photo every day, a reminder of why the road mattered, why the brotherhood mattered, why staying alert and staying compassionate and staying willing to stop when someone needed help mattered. Because you never knew when you'd pass someone standing on a highway with a sign, when your decision to stop or keep driving would be the difference between life and death, between giving up and holding on, between a tragedy and a miracle. The cardboard sign that Colonel Hastings had held that morning, the sign that had said, "Veteran needs help, lost everything. God bless," was preserved and eventually donated to the Arkansas State Veterans Museum, where it hangs today in a display about veteran homelessness and community response. School groups visit and learn about Colonel Hastings and the truckers who stopped, and teachers use the story to talk about civic responsibility, about the gap between rhetoric and reality when it comes to supporting veterans, about the power of ordinary people to create change. When they refuse to accept that suffering is inevitable or that someone else's problem isn't their concern. Governor Bradford, true to her word, maintained the programs she'd promised, personally overseeing their implementation and expansion, using Colonel Hastings's story in her advocacy for increased veteran funding at both state and federal levels. She was reelected in a landslide 2 years later, with veteran organizations crediting her response to the Amina's 40 incident as proof that she was a leader who listened, who acted, who understood that government exists to serve people, and that when it fails to serve those who have served their country, that failure demands immediate and comprehensive correction. And somewhere on Interstate 40, at mile marker 157 just outside Little Rock, there's a rest area now, dedicated to Colonel William Hastings and the truckers who stopped that rainy November morning. It's called the Highway Angels Rest Area, and it features a memorial explaining what happened there, a statue of a trucker helping a veteran, and a wall listing the names of all the drivers who responded to Danny's call that day. But more importantly, it features a 24/7 help station with direct phone lines to veteran services, to mental health crisis counselors, to the Highway Angels Network, ensuring that anyone who stops there, in need, anyone who's desperate or homeless or at the end of their rope, will find help instead of indifference, will find connection instead of isolation, will find hope instead of despair. Because that's what that morning on Amina's 40 proved. That's what those 17 trucks represented. That's what the brotherhood of the road means when it's more than just words and becomes action. That we don't have to accept that decorated veterans stand on highways with signs, that we don't have to drive past suffering pretending we don't see it, that we don't have to wait for someone else to solve problems that we have the power to address ourselves. We can stop. We can help. We can be the answer to someone's prayer, the response to someone's desperation, the proof that humanity and compassion and basic decency still exist in a world that often seems to have forgotten those values. We can be the difference between a tragedy and a triumph, between a system that fails and a community that catches, between a veteran who dies forgotten on a highway and a veteran who lives to tell the story of the day strangers became family, the day the brotherhood of the road became real, the day 17 trucks stopped and everything changed.